started.
Okay.
So as long as Sam is the host, then it won't matter if I
okay. Then I don't have any privileges, so go to the participants tab, make him the host, and you're off to the races.
Okay, so more, make host. Okay, that's good. And I can still be a co-host, but I'm just worried that if the issue recurs, I'm
no problem. Okay, I leave you to your own devices. Play nice.
Have a great day.
Okay, that's good, Sam. Yeah. This machine was working fine, but then I joined a Toastmasters meeting last Thursday, and when there were like a dozen people on, which is sort of the maximum, then my system froze, my video froze, but just Zoom. And when a few people disconnected and I got down to like 8 or 9 people, it resumed again. So I'm going to research that, because this is not a brand new machine, but it's actually a pretty hefty machine. And I want to find out, why is it freezing when there's lots of people on? Or was that just a fluke? Sam says, I have no video or my.
It went off the screen. Hold on.
Let me bring up the chat.
I have no video or microphone, still in bed. We'll roll out maybe, but I'm texting now. Hey, if I could come on camera like this every time, you guys should certainly be able to.
Yeah, this is a machine very much like the one of yours that fell over. This is one of these all-in-one with the stand in the back that if it actually closes, you're in trouble.
Yes.
Every time I upgrade a machine, you have to run it through its paces for like a week or two. Be sure to make sure that you haven't overlooked some issue that hasn't been fixed. Like the CD player doesn't work on this machine.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, it's one of those slide in from the side, the slot loading.
Okay. Sam is explaining that he does not have a video camera hooked to the PC tower on the 60-inch screen that he uses from his bed. Okay, Sam.
All right, so Sam will just be audio only for the time being, unless he gets out of bed eventually.
So I sort of feel like the kids in the classroom when there's no teacher in the room and they're not sure what to do.
And the cat's away, the mice will play. So Joshua's here. Okay, so Sam must have let them in already.
Okay, so Sam wants to know why Doug is not here, and that's because his daughter is visiting for the first time in 2 years, and he's in charge of, I guess, a house full of people that will be coming in the next hour and a half.
That's a good excuse. That's a good excuse.
Yeah.
Yeah, but leave an assignment.
Well, the assignment was, and I've already handed mine in. I came empty. I only used 2 buttons to get here. I'm 100% present as I can be. And Doug is not here. I think we win.
We can't talk about him. What's the rule? What's Doug's rule about not talking about him when he's not here?
I never saw any rules.
I think Doug is the one who had 2 fairly hard and fast rules. Number 1, you don't talk about somebody negatively if they're not here. And what was the other one? Oh, if somebody says they're uncomfortable on a topic, then you don't do the topic. You remember that, Stacy?
I don't remember the second one. I happen to agree with the first, and it's not just a question of speaking negatively. It's more a question of you may not be saying it the right, you may be characterizing somebody the wrong way based on your misinterpretation.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you're the Bible person. Doesn't it even say that you're not supposed to gossip about somebody, good or bad?
Yeah, gossiping is one of those odd taboos that it's a strong taboo in some cultures, and it's, it tends to be ignored in modern American culture.
Well, I've been paying a lot of attention to that one in particular, always trying to figure out why it would be good or bad. It makes sense why you wouldn't want to gossip about somebody in the negative. But in the positive, it makes sense too. And I think that has to do with misrepresenting someone, I know there have been times where I've trusted somebody that maybe I wouldn't have trusted except for the relationship this person had to someone else that I trusted.
Yeah. You know about HIPAA, the medical regulation that you can't disclose? Well, gossiping sort of is overlapping with this HIPAA thing, which is a law in this country that you can't discuss somebody's medical situation, which is considered private. And if you enlarge that to arbitrary private issues, gossiping tends to be talking about matters that a person considers personal private matters and not for public disclosure. And so just generally they say, well, then gossiping in general covers that without having to try to make it specific. Because how would you know what's private or not to somebody?
Well, I think there's a lot of reasons to not gossip. I mean, you might have heard something at one point in time that somebody felt. They might have now changed their mind.
Right.
And it doesn't get addressed. I mean, I've watched enough soap operas to know how these things happen and turn out badly.
I have a challenge. I have a challenge for you.
Wait, and Alex had something to, his hand's been up
Yeah,
too.
talking is great to encourage enliven conversation, but when the magnifying glass is turned around to face the person who's not in the group, who's not here, we're talking about somebody who's not here, we need to turn that magnifying glass back halfway so that we're able to talk and enliven the conversation with our terms and ideas, but not focus on any particular person, because that helps to remove gossip.
See, in politics, and democratic politics is fairly modern by comparison to early versions of governance where you had kings and things like that. So it's normal to talk about politicians who are not present to defend themselves. That's part of our culture. But that's fairly modern, because when was democracy introduced? I don't know, within the last few hundred years, I think. So before that, you couldn't talk about the king or the priest or whoever was the ruler of the time. That was considered against the rule of the ruler. So in democracy, you almost have to have political discussions of the politician who's not present. And that means that you can talk about other people, but it's supposed to be public figures. So it's one thing to talk about public figures, but then a private individual is a different story. And the law in America tries to be clear on that. That if you write if you write a newspaper article about a person who's a public figure, you're more immune from slander than if you write a newspaper story about a private individual, like the victim of a crime. And so if you listen to the news, they will not disclose information about the victim of a crime. But once a perpetrator has been tried and convicted, then you can say all kinds of stuff. But not while they're being charged, but not tried. And private individuals have much more protection against slander, which is talking about them when they're not present, than public figures. It's gotten really complicated since it was way back when taboos about gossip were first introduced into the culture.
Yeah. Colin, you were waiting to say something?
Yeah, I would like to bring it back to trying to hold on to all the different balls in the air with, this being unblocking. That's one context. I'm kind of, the hamster wheel I'm on right now is in the highlighting the conversation about starting from nothing. We're being 100% present, and I'm just going to back away from that, let that handlebar go, and switch over to say that when you're talking about anything, you need to add a context. I challenge you to talk about anything without a context. It's just not going to mean anything. So we're jumping across context as we talk. We're jumping from a private context. We're jumping from a context of something where you're criticizing negatively. And I think Barry did good to bring up the fact that the more public the figure is, the more likely it's okay to speak about them when they're not present. So I would hope that everything I have to say about somebody in this group is leading a positive direction, either clearing up a conflict of some sort. I'm not looking to dispose of anybody. So I don't think anybody here should be like that. So the rule about not talking about somebody should be just a matter of course. So if we do violate that, we should, be able to know when that's happening. So my challenge is, if you're going to talk about gossip, start with that one. I think that was the first real term that needs to be defined. Define gossip.
Well, this is interesting, Colin, because you remember a week or two ago, hey, where's Barry? Nobody's seen Barry. Is he okay? Does anybody know if he's okay? That's sort of on the boundary between gossip and,
Intention's the secret key ingredient.
yeah, and that's
That's right.
and
That's right. It is intention.
That's a fuzzy issue. What are your intentions?
Yeah, it was to be of service to somebody that I cared about. That's what it was.
Yeah.
My intention
And I was
is to be
I was
ethical.
starting from zero because I didn't know. And Stacy says, and I said, well, maybe I could look up his phone number. And she goes, that's a good Christian boy I know.
Well, that was, so I was worried about Barry because I haven't heard from him. But so I went in the private chat to ask if anybody else had, because I thought maybe I could have missed him. So Colin, first you made some snarky comments, which is why after you offered to look up,
Snarky. Now that's gossip right there.
no, it's not, because you're right here and you can deny it if you want.
Still
and we can-
gossip. You can't
we
see
can-
me.
we can go to the text and we can look.
No, it's true. But I wasn't being snarky. I was actually talking in the wordy way we do. And we were talking.
Are you sure you want to stick to that?
The ambiguous
totally.
way, or it could be understood either way.
Are you sure?
Well, I don't-
Because we could go back to the text.
I said maybe he's, because he was cooling off. So I've said maybe he's found I can't remember what train it was, but we were talking about the
Something
whatever
about
train.
being clueless, I believe.
Yeah, the clue train. That's it. Because the clue train was a topic that we were discussing, and it was something I was coming across. I think with Tease. Tease was about the clue train.
I actually met the guys who wrote it, two of them.
Yeah. So I said maybe Barry's downstairs playing with the clue train, like in the basement with his toy trains. But it totally went over your head, Stacy.
Yeah, I'm not buying anything that you're selling right now.
Well, that's because you're already believing what you believe. I have a train set. Thank you very much.
All right.
Getting into training.
A good leadership skills and teamwork captains, they know how to get the people convinced, because a mind convinced against its will is of the same opinion still. So your ability, your artistic ability and your talent to get people on side and convinced that your point of view has merit, it is only possible, or is generally much easier if you're aligned with the ethical considerations.
Yeah. And also values, because points of view can have merit, but in terms of the values, this person thinks that the value associated with that is more important than the value of the other guy. And so
Yeah,
both
that's right.
can have merit, but which value is more important, the near-term value or the long-term value? This is
The
where
values.
people can normally differ. Yes, this
That's
is good in the
specific.
short term, but in the long term, there's some downsides that we're going to run into.
That's the
And
range of specificity between the different individuals, the different levels of value. Yeah.
Yep. And whether you're looking, I mean, politicians look to the next election. So they tend to think about what's good for me between now and the next election, which is like 1 or 2 years. Whereas a leader says, well, what's going to be good for the country for the next 40 years? They're going to make
Yeah.
different decisions.
What's good for the country is good people with good leadership skills
Right.
who value the ethical considerations before they put forward stuff that's on the edge of the,
And that's the
corruption
downside
side.
of democracy, because if a person does something that's good for the long term, but not for the short term, they're likely not to get reelected. Because the public who does the voting tends to have a very short term time horizon.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very important.
Attention span 8 seconds.
Right.
Well,
This is a
attention
problem with
to-
democracy is that, representatives get elected every 2 years. And so they only make decisions that are good for the near term, screw the long term. Because they won't get elected if they promote long-term solutions, because they're going to be expensive today with the payoff tomorrow.
I'd like to raise that up one level to the idea of diplomacy and PR marketing, because people stand behind this PR wall And that wall's disappearing in our modern day, I think, from what I hear from some analysts. Companies, what they do behind their curtain is more, available through Twitter than it used to be back 20 years ago. So the idea of lifting it up one level, so it's not about the politics, but that's an example of diplomacy. For example, I don't think I'm very diplomatic when I'm putting the value of truth ahead of somebody's feelings, like how they feel. And like, so you have to be careful what context you make that choice. I'm saying in a global challenges context, I'm willing to risk that to keep the truth straight, keep the record straight. And if we're going into personal matters, which is what I'm saying, the context we have to be aware of, I don't really need to be in a global personal matters conversation, right? That's the way I look at it. So I get trapped in these contexts that I didn't ask for. So, if I know what shows to come to, then I'll come to the ones where we're, but it's very interesting. You get to know the people and you want to know more about them. So there's a whole range of long-term consequences, isn't there, Barry?
By the way, because Sam doesn't have a microphone, he wrote, quote, "The truth will set you free, but first it will piss you off." That's a quote from Gloria Steinem.
People in countries where everybody has to vote, compulsory voting, they look at America and they can see why the democracy has become so corrupted. And so just people are disenfranchised. It's because the freedom to not vote means that people who don't vote are not getting services and legislation written for them. The people who do vote are encouraged to vote by corporations who need their ministers in the government, the bureaucrats in power, to help write legislation. So it's a corporatocracy, if you like. And the one thing we noticed was that the majority of people who do not vote are in the bottom of the pyramid, poorly educated, people without wealth and education. They're the group that's more likely to say, why bother voting? Let the people who like to vote vote. I don't want to vote. I don't think my vote is going to help. And that's a huge percentage of people, by the way. They don't get health care. They don't get Medicare. They don't get a good justice system. They end up in a corporate prison for not paying their tax for parking or using pot or something like that. Over.
I just got an alert that's a new feature in Zoom in the reactions. You can send yes, no, slow down, and speed up. They're the green, the red, the gray, and the blue symbols in the second row of the reactions. I think that must be new because I got an alert that it's new and I didn't see it before.
Maybe they added one because I think they've been around a while.
They?
Yeah.
Or maybe it's just I'm getting the alert because I'm on a different machine that I just refreshed.
If I had my way, we'd already be in AR rooms.
Oh, by the way, did you catch that podcast yesterday of AI recognizing emotions?
No, but sentiment analysis type of thing.
Yeah, my long-term colleague who founded the whole field of affective computing was the guest for half an hour on a podcast that just came out a few days ago. And she was talking about, the role of AI as becoming emotionally aware and able to recognize and interpret emotional states and therefore adjust the response of the system accordingly. And she gave a very nice discussion of that on this podcast yesterday. If you didn't see the notice of it, I can find it again.
I would call that an implementation of a people adapter.
She wouldn't, and I wouldn't. She calls it affective computing. Oh, by the way, it had sliders in it. No, not that one. A different one had sliders. I gave you another one this morning.
You want interactivity, but you don't want power over, right?
Yeah. Adobe has got a new product, whose name I now forget, but it's to create storybook characters with a visual avatar and features, including what they call a mind map. And on the device to construct the system, it's got little sliders for the intensity of certain features. So I thought you might appreciate this character construction tool that Adobe is. It's called Fresh. Fresh.
They're probably looking into my research and stole it.
I doubt that they know that any of it's connects to my research, but it's interesting because you can see it's beginning to appear as a commercial product.
Alex?
I'm thinking about the sliders for people that adapt the software, and I'd like to have sliders that as you push them up higher, they get harder to push up.
Yeah. And the middle ground.
You can't lie, so they go where they go, right?
Yeah. It's like, no, this creature has no personality at all. It's an automaton. This person is a drama queen. Everything is high emotion.
This person let me down in the past.
Don't trust them.
Yeah, this person just said they turned over a new leaf and they're trying really hard, and everybody believes it, you know.
Actually, trustworthiness is an important feature that's been around a long time, whether some character, whether it's a human,
it's called gossip. It's called gossip, actually.
Whether somebody is trustworthy, if they say they're going to do something, will they do it? And will it be done well? Is it going to be competent? And will they keep their word? And so trustworthiness is actually a pretty common feature for determining whether somebody is a good candidate for a role. That's been around for decades as a slider.
I would hedge my bet and say that in the challenge of defining gossip, we're talking about negative gossip, negative criticism. And I think Sam has offered a word that I've latched onto and use as well, called feedback.
Yeah.
So what's the difference between feedback and gossip?
Feedback is to the person. Gossip is about the person to a third party. Feedback is directly to the person. So one of the, I don't know where, maybe Sam posted this note that if you say to a common friend, a third party, that so-and-so has got an issue, the common friend will then turn around and give the feedback directly to the first person. So it goes through an intermediary. And that's one of the things about gossip is it will get back to the person.
Yes, yeah, that's true. Well, I'm not sure about if it gets back to them or not. That's just a feature of the network, which I'm talking, your network of gossip sets the N value at 1, right, where there could be an N value of 12, where, you know, somebody told marketing told development told, you know,
right,
the DevOps, you know, shit's coming downhill.
There's a spaciousness in your consciousness. There's an area when you're focusing on people, and the gossip comes in when it's narrowed down. But when it's widened out and spacious, there's less gossip. You've got less intent to talk badly about somebody else, especially if
well,
they're not in that conversation.
Is badly the thing? Because again,
well, it's like constructive criticism.
It's such a gray area. I don't think the word means anything. And in fact, I think it's one of the most powerful tools that we have to become sentient and share information in maps and in language and words.
That constructive criticism is good when you've got positive things to say and that you intentions to help this person who needs it, in your view.
Well, positive. I mean, feedback, for example, in the reaction, one of the things is speed up and slow down. If you're talking faster than I can listen, which is pretty common for me because I'm a slow listener, I could click the slow down, meaning if you want me to catch everything you're saying, you're going to have to speak more slowly. On the other hand, if you're taking forever to talk about something that I already know pretty much about, I wish you'd speed up and get it over with because I'm not learning anything new. So those are useful feedbacks, because how would you know whether you're talking faster than I can listen or so slow that you're putting me to sleep?
Well, let me talk about Doug then. So I went through that whole spiel that he gave Sam on the one-on-one, which was really good. I tried to clean it up so that it was English, took the ums and ahs out of it and made point form, a little bit of logic processing, parsing. Anyway, I can't believe how long it took me to get through that. And Sam sat there with his hands folded the whole time and waited. And like, wow, what patience. Like, that was amazing patience to sit there and not interrupt. Like, kudos to Sam for that.
Look for eyes glazing over.
It's important.
Yeah.
Well, that's the difference. If you really want an answer, then you are patient because you truly want to hear what the person's saying. If you're just doing it to be nice or for some formality, then yeah, you're going to run out of patience because you really don't care in the first place.
Yeah. Look for
I
eyes
think-
glazing over. It's a pretty strong nonverbal feedback. I once was talking to my nephew and I saw his eyes glaze over. So I changed the subject. It took me a while to notice that his eyes had glazed over.
Well, I think in the case of the conversation of what means to come empty, and I put in brackets to a collaboration, because I'm adding that context, because that's my first Venn diagram circle, is we're inside a collaboration circle. So if it doesn't have to do with collaboration, then Doug's not talking about it. Now that's a black and white, right? So that's probably wrong, but that's kind of where I'm going, because he says it a few times. So anyway, to make a long story short, I think Sam has the patience because it's afforded to him knowing that it's going to be a longer conversation that's not just over, right? So immediately. So if it's a conversation where you only got a few minutes to get back and forth, then it's not going to be one of these long things where you got something important to say, but you got to wait till the guy's finished telling you, about the weather. It's like you interrupt. So different containers for conversations, and this is a really interesting one. So I think we should put the time into it, because I do believe if we could find the water that the fish is in, we would learn something.
Speaking of which, I see that Kayla's cat is getting antsy and we haven't heard from Kayla or Joshua. Perhaps we should take a pause for Kayla and Joshua to say hello.
I didn't even know Kayla had a cat. I see a
Something in the
dog.
background is wagging its
dog.
tail. Oh, it's the dog. Okay. Some
Hey,
animal is
everybody.
wagging.
Hello.
Yeah, he's our Siberian Husky. And yeah, they're kind of noisy. So I'm just gonna go ahead and mute myself for now. Thank you, though.
And is Joshua out yet? Chances are no, because he's got his camera off and it's early there.
Nope, I am not out of tried. It ain't gonna happen. So
Okay.
I gotta
So
get
we-
some coffee.
So you can pipe up a little bit later when you're refreshed.
Oh no, I'm enjoying listening. I wanted to tell you about the AI and the tools and the dials and the machine learning, and you just told me that. So I'm like, okay, he's on it. Yay, I would be happy.
Yeah. Well, the people in the affective computing have been trying for 25 years to teach intelligent systems, software systems, to be able to detect emotions, interpret them, and adjust their behavior accordingly. And that's been
Yep.
it's 20-year challenge that is a huge frontier now.
Yeah, I figured it out with heat mapping on the web a while back, but that was just my little hack to get people's emotions, how
Yeah.
fast they move their mouse and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's an interesting field in computing, and it's a
Interestingly
really
enough,
big deal.
if you use an infrared camera on a face, the eyes are very reflective in the infrared. So if you illuminate the face with infrared and then use an infrared camera, you can tell which way somebody's looking. You can you can do eye tracking. And that's really important. What is somebody looking at? With ordinary light, it's hard to tell which way somebody's facing.
Well, that's the other problem with Zoom, is that people are in a different order. So if I see Barry looking down and smiling at somebody, I think he's smiling at the person that I see in the box, and it's not necessarily that.
Yeah, eye tracking is important, and it's very degraded in ordinary internet services for humans. This is why, having the eyes be red like they are when you take photographs. That's because there was so much infrared in the camera on ordinary cameras. But eye tracking is very useful.
Kayla?
She's eating. She's got a camera. He's got a mic off too.
Okay, she's just listening and doing.
She's trying to.
No, she just shoved some food in her
she's
mouth
looking
when you
for
said Kayla.
something on-
Chewing. She's
Very
chewing. Yeah, Californians
Hi.
are all just coming alive.
There's something wrong with my Mac because my mouse wasn't moving around I kind of could hear you through the chaos of the dogs and the television in the background. Was there something specific you had to ask me for?
Just including you, that's it.
Okay. One of the things that I kind of wanted to go back to, and I'm really sorry if it's, about 10 minutes ago, but Colin, you mentioned that you don't want to hear people's personal, stories and stuff, and I get it to some degree. But for instance, like Afghanistan, if we had a room full of people who went through some of the BS of what's going on in Afghanistan, they may want to share their personal stories. And I think in that context, it kind of is appropriate to be able to draw from your own, personal experience and to bring to life something that's very sensitive to be able to talk about. Now, yes, I agree that sometimes I shouldn't talk about my dancing, but
No, not at all. Not at all. I'm not saying that at all. You bring you. It's the therapy work that I'm talking about. Like, I don't think I want to be in therapy sessions.
Okay. Well, thanks for clarifying. That's it.
I love you. I love your dancing. I love all the people's gifts that they have. We're all different. It's all good. And if we could focus and share, that would be great.
Hey, Colin, it's funny that you mentioned that you don't want to be in therapy sessions, because the word therapy is the Greek word for paying attention to. So if somebody says, I want you to pay attention to me, in Greek, you say, I want therapy. That's literally what the word meant. A therapist is someone who pays attention.
Yeah, but I'm just think they're pointing to a funny part of their body I shouldn't be interested in. Like, I'm interested in their ideas. If it's and cultural global things and turmoil. Alex was talking about people who aren't as privileged. We had a gentleman, Jonas, yesterday, who was punching a hole through to our world. And I say our world because it doesn't seem like he actually has come in to be one of the core members yet, although I think he's been around quite a while. I think people know who he is. Is this the same Jonas that was from Josephitz?
Yes.
Yeah, he was a good affiliate of because of the work in Africa, wasn't it, Stacy? Because
Yes,
Lewis was doing work in Africa, and he was one of his clients.
Yes.
Yeah. So I've started a new Trello board for Michael, in tribute to what he's done, and so hopefully we'll get it's on the newsletter board. So I'm thinking over time we could make a good article newsletter about him. If we had a spot where we could all collaborate these things. I think Doug said he was going to start a thing way back when we first heard about Michael, and I don't know where that went to. But yeah, there's lots of things like Kayla, we can really care about what we bump into, and we can try to figure out what we can handle as far as what time and attention we have to offer. And I think the idea is, how do we scale that? Yeah, I just don't feel like when I'm searching back for it's nice to touch base with people and do a little bit of soul searching and spiritual retreat and diving inside with Gertrude and Doug. I'm not saying that's a bad experience. It's just not something that I want to do every week. And at least not online. But that's just me. So that's just and that's not what I thought we were here for. But I do realize that there's a gray area between personal and public, and shareable and unshareable. And I guess just by feel our way through that, I guess, because there's like, I guess I've talked long enough, but I just feel bad. I just feel bad that someone would think that I'm trying to exclude or block them in any way to what they need. It's just I'm speaking on my own, what I feel I have to offer. And that's kind of why I've been doing the little Twitch thing, because I'm in my own little world, right? And people who want to come in and see what's happening at the lab, they're more than welcome. But me coming here is taking time away from the lab, right? So I'm sure I can do some things here, update, learn things, you know, it's good to network, but the project that's happening here over the last 4 years is morphed, and I don't think we've tracked on the mind map how it's emerged, but I think we all kind of know and feel some changes. So I have hope that this group isn't going to just disband. I was thinking yesterday, you know, what if Doug just stopped doing this altogether? Like, I would feel terrible. Like, so I must be getting something out of it, right?
Well, you're getting attention. When somebody talks, it's an implicit request for attention. Remember, attention is the English word for which the Greek word is therapos, therapy.
Yeah. Well, I think my ideas need therapy. Yes.
And people speak because they want feedback on what they're saying.
That's it. My ideas are in therapy, not my my depression or my PTSD or whatever the hell those things are, my dyslexia, or, you know, I'll cope with those things. I don't need, you know.
Well, do you remember this, or was it, I think it was this way. Remember this gesture from one of the videos that either Sam or Doug posted? Anybody remember this?
It's not coming to me.
Sam probably would remember, but I don't know if he's looking at the video. Remember that video of the guy whose name I'm forgetting, who gave a really nice talk on post-traumatic stress disorder? It's a few months ago. And he pointed out that they discovered a therapy, and you have to do this in sessions over many months, but having somebody do eye tracking like this for like 20 minutes 3 times a week for several months brought them out of PTSD.
I remember you saying that now. Now I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, it was very interesting because it was a surprising therapy. Doug remembers it. Talk to him about it.
EMDR is what Sam put in. I think that's correct.
Yeah, which I see if I can remember what it stands for, but well, it's easier to look it up than try to remember what it stands for. But yeah, that's the name. That's the name of this therapy.
I think that affects our ability to focus is emotional quite often.
What it does is it directs your visual attention to something very simple, very elementary. And by directing your attention to something very elementary, you stop worrying about all kinds of weird stuff that's been bothering you for years. It slowly brings you back to ground.
Yeah. Breaking your line of thought.
Yeah, it brings you back to the present moment, because this is literally the present moment. So you're brought back to attending to something very trivial, very elementary for the present moment. And that draws you out of being stuck in your regurgitating your baggage.
Yeah. You can get drawn into the daily goings on in the media and the press.
Right. It's why people go to the movies. The movies are an escape. And when you go to the movies, you're paying attention to the movie. You go to the world of this storybook world of the movies, and that's an escape. This is how people escape from reality. And this is just another simple way to, a very trivial reality you can focus on for a few minutes.
Well, there's a world full of people who are just focused on trying to get the next meal, wondering where it's going to come from.
Kayla solved that problem. She's eating.
Go to the fridge. So is the United States going into Ethiopia with the similar intentions as they went into Syria and Iraq?
Oh, yeah.
Ethiopia is rich in minerals and gas and oil and other minerals, plutonium.
We have a long history of invading other countries to do world building, and everyone was a disaster. It goes all the way back to the Korean War, and every decade since the Korean War, we've gone into one country after another.
But it's not about world building, is it? It's about weapons manufacturing, building.
Yep, exactly. That's the hidden agenda, Daddy Warbucks.
Yeah.
And Daddy Warbucks goes back to Little Orphan Annie, which goes back to, I think, the First World War. I think Little Orphan Annie goes back to the 1920s.
Yeah. I remember that.
Daddy Warbucks, the rich guy who made his money selling weapons. EMDR, eye movement, something. I don't know what the DR stands for.
Or was right.
Desensitization, I think. Eye movement desensitization, something.
Maybe response, desensitization response, maybe.
Yeah. Somebody who's got a browser running can look it up. But I think it's eye movement something.
Well, I'd like to do a little role playing with sort of like what Stacy wanted to do as well. And I offered to Stacy to play this game with me, where we're looking back at videos like I'm doing with the Sam and Doug one. And, you know, we can kind of discuss what we think, rewatching the video and creating new trails from the warm data.
We should probably do that next week when Doug is back.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, produce it during the week or other times.
Yeah.
And then maybe have a 5-minute piece would be nice. That would be impactful. But on top of that, I was also trying to build some indicators that, you know, we could observe that we can put on, like the slow down, go faster, but maybe some that we could think of that we could use as a group, and we could store that data based on the timestamp, and we could collect some effective emotional data straight from the humanoid's brain. Now, if it's different than when a computer reads, because a computer's reading something, when a person says how they're feeling, it's more subjective. But at the same time, I think it's still valid feedback. It's just a different set of data. So I'm not sure on the science of the credibility of volunteer data over computer read data, or you know, from, like Barry was saying, where their eyes are looking. You know, somebody forgets where they were looking, but the computer's going to know. So obviously that's pretty obvious. But other things, how you're feeling, just because your blood pressure or something might rise doesn't mean that you're not feeling something else. So I don't know, but it's very interesting. I think what I'm trying to say is, if we review these videos, we could do a lo-fi version of effective feedback.
Yeah.
Effective
Remember mood
emotional
rings?
feedback.
Back in the 60s, you had mood rings, which were supposed to change color depending on the temperature of your skin. They weren't very accurate or reliable. You know, they were very crude, but the idea of you know, declaring your mood by some technology, you know, it's not a new idea. And in fact, faces always have done that. When you're, you know, when your face flushes and glows because you're happy, and when you go sallow and pale when you're not. I mean, that's been present in human culture ever since we've had faces.
I guess what I'm talking about is the opposite of a poker game, where you're trying to keep your poker face.
Right.
Actually, you're actually trying to show people how your theory of what you're thinking.
Or hide
So,
it. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And actually, machines who can take a picture of your face and analyze it can actually do better than about 95% of the people in detecting subtle cues on the face. They're not as good as the best people, but they're good. They're better than about 95% of the average person decoding what a facial expression suggests.
And in my mind, you would have those as ready-made points of interest that
Yeah.
you could go back and ask the person, you know, what were you feeling? It looks like you're feeling this. Oh, that is what I was feeling.
Yeah.
Oh, no, that's not what I was feeling. I was feeling this. But yeah, again, difference between the science lab doing it for everybody at scale, or doing it for us, or are we an experiment we're experimenting on? There's so many ways to look at this group. But yeah, I think this emotion effective learning, AR feedback indicators for conversations, so that you can keep them as fair as possible, right? Like if you got somebody who's going to be playing poker with you, then, you know, you're against that anyway. That's kind of the idea of might over right, or bronze or brains, you know, animal, you know, whoever wants it the most gets it. That's not logical, that's just forceful. So I think we're playing both of those contexts in the world of challenges. And so in this group, we kind of jump from the laboratory, and then when we jump to the personal, that's where I'm just saying, of the, say if there's a few different rooms that I could go in and work in, that would be the one that I would leave to the professionals to deal with, helping people with becoming stable or whatever they need, to be able to
Emotionally well adjusted. The goal
Yeah,
is
well
to be
adjusted.
emotionally, it's challenging to become emotionally well adjusted. As I said to Joshua yesterday, if you're not depressed, you're not paying attention. The more you pay attention to what's going on in the world, the more depressing it is. Alex? And me.
I got a trick to solving that problem of the more you focus on the world, the more depressed you get. And it's based on me, when I was getting depressed, I had to reach out for a solution to fix this problem that was immediately happening, which was this depression.
Yeah.
And the answer was the three questions: what's wrong? Why is it wrong? What am I going to do about it? That was the solution. And that
Have you ever been to a website called despair.com? It's a
No.
really funny website. They mainly sell posters and stuff, but all the posters are very sort of sarcastic. So they're making fun of desperate situations. And if you're in a state of depression, go to despair.com and find a poster. They're all free. You have a copy, not to get the paper.
Well, it's what's despairing is the fact that there are simple solutions, but getting them out to people is amongst the noise of the media and the social platforms. That's the trick.
Humor is a very good cure for depression.
Yeah.
And the best humorists, the best comedians are riffing on things that people are kind of anxious and despairing about.
Is that what you meant, Alex? The solution for depression, or the solution for something else?
It applies to any problem. What I should have said when I answered Barry's question was the solution I found was optimism and opportunity. Every problem is a solution in disguise. Over.
It's an opportunity, yeah.
No, sorry,
was it the Japanese symbol for crisis is opportunity?
And the Republican Party.
You know,
yeah.
Problem and every problem is also an opportunity.
If two people are fighting, there's an opportunity to intervene and be the peacemaker. But the trouble is that you have to be careful.
It's also the raw material for sitcoms. A lot of sitcoms are making fun of exactly what you're talking about when people are fighting. Look at how often you have squabbling in sitcoms. Where do you think the source of that is? It's real life.
Yeah. Does he hate me, or is my neighbor trying to get me for something?
Yeah, fake gossip, so we don't have to do it ourselves.
Yeah. People do it themselves anyway. The mimesis. They copy the snarky remarks that they learn by watching sitcoms.
Yeah. No, there's no real value to them here against people. I think the snarky remarks are against ideas. And ideas are open season.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. One of the things I find, feedback, it's easier, at least for me, to give feedback to a scientist or an engineer who's working on a project. For example, if I have a product that an engineer designed and is on the market and the product fails, if I call up the engineer who designed the product and I give them very technical, precise feedback of the failure mode, they love it. Because they don't, that's very useful feedback. And I've called up engineers and they've sent me a replacement item because I took the time to find them and give them technical feedback of a very interesting failure mode of their product. Politician wouldn't do that.
You kind of are a technology pioneer, Barry. So, you know, you've got a lot of stories of how different technologies emerged. It's interesting to listen to. So I'm sure you've seen a lot of different failures.
Oh, I mean, yes, I'm a student of the history of science and technology, which is sort of makes sense. You know, if you're a politician, you want to study world history. I studied the history of science and technology and inventions because that's relevant to my career.
I've got a problem with the oil and fossil fuel industry attacking activists who are against oil pipelines and what have you. People who are environmentalists, environmental activists, they're being labelled as terrorists.
Yeah, I know. That's unfair.
That's really sad, you know.
It's unfair. Especially when they're rooting these undesirable projects, pipelines and highways, you know, through in Native American territories or the poor part of town, ripping up the poor part of town to put in the highway. And it's unfair. I mean, you know, it's in the backyard of the people who are least able to oppose it.
Well, progress is progress, but at what cost?
Yeah. Well.
Yeah, the context there is scale and compartmentalization at that scale. Right. It's not an individual's thing that they can handle. It's the government.
The government's not thinking about foreseeability.
Well, they're looking. They may be looking 10 years in the future, or they may be just looking at the next election.
Well, I mean, a good president can look 8 years in the future, or at least 4 years, because that's the next election for the president. But it's hard to get anybody to look 20 years in the future.
Well, pipelines are that kind of thing. You know, big infrastructure, dams. The Hoover Dam, that wasn't a weekend project.
But now pipelines are fossil fuels. The fossil fuels are going out of style because, you know, we're wrecking the atmosphere. Now maybe we can pump methane or, you know, something different through the pipelines, but because methane produces water and it's just water, right?
Sometimes knowing science as well as the news is depressing.
And maybe carbon dioxide too, I think, you know, that I think about it.
Yeah, well, there's a big storm coming down to, sorry, go ahead, Alex.
This 20-year project might be a good theme for Thursday or Friday.
I'm still floating the project of getting a hold of or understanding if it's worthwhile to tap on Sam's offer to Barry. I know I'm impinging on that, so I haven't put anything on Trello about that, but if it's something we want to do, that's a little project we could do.
Yeah. I don't know to what extent people really want to sit through a graduate level seminar on the role of emotions in learning. I know that Stacy dove into part of it on her own, but it's a very arcane subject. It's not one that, you know, any random collection of people would be interested in sitting through for an hour or 40 minutes.
Well, the point is, I may be wrong, but it feels like something you said that was valuable that got shut down and you resented it. And my idea is, if it's a good idea, then it's still probably a good idea. Yeah. And maybe in following it through, you might find a better home. It might fall into the effective learning, might fall into a people adapter. You never know.
It didn't get shut down. It just ran out of time.
Well, it was a program about the ethics in.
Oh, the one in Wikipedia.
Yeah.
Oh, that's the one that the movie ran out of money to make.
Yeah, the movie ran out of money, but I'm thinking the idea and the fact that course and teaching, you know, civics and critical thinking, which that would be a advanced course in critical thinking.
Yeah. That was a big disappointment. That was a very sobering experience to learn that extreme course on ethics was ruled to be beyond the scope of Wikimedia Foundation, whose mission is to host the sum of all knowledge for the benefit of all mankind, and students around the world. That was a very sobering revelation.
Well, if the Chinese have got a 50-year plan that's updated every 5 years, they have a good understanding of international politics, so they'll end up taking over the world.
Maybe. Any feedback from Joshua? He's listening to all this, he says.
I don't really have much to add. I'm just enjoying listening. Are you looking for
paying
any
attention?
specific feedback? Oh no,
Joshua,
I'm barely paying attention. I'm meditating and just listening to you guys talk, and it's soothing. I'm
Soothing.
Geeking out.
yeah. I'm just trying to get out of bed. I actually got a bad back. I threw my back out, so that's where I'm at right now.
Oh dear.
Yeah. So
Well, good luck with that.
A lot of innovative ideas coming from people fighting climate change issues, like these firefighting drone bots.
Well, we just used two of them in Afghanistan to take out, what is it, ISIS-K operatives. They took out a couple of ISIS-K operatives with drones in the last day or two. I don't know if you saw
Yeah,
that.
but that's warfare
Yeah.
drones.
That was
I'm talking public service drones, not warfare, not defense. I'm talking
Oh,
about
you could replace the traffic helicopters with drones to tell you what
emergency
the traffic is in the morning without having two guys go up in a helicopter.
emergency response drones for the
Yeah.
firefighters and
sure.
also for police can use them.
Yeah.
Facial
Science
recognition.
fiction. Science fiction is pretty much real. So
Oh well, yeah. Face recognition on bots. Imagine a drone coming down to tell you haven't paid your bill.
microbots just, forming whatever, wherever.
Now, back in 2001, which was the date in the name of the movie 2001: A Space Odyssey. The book and the movie, goes all the way back to, I think, the 1960s. And in the book and the movie 2001: A Space Odyssey, it made a bunch of predictions about what the technology would be like in 2001. When 2001 came around, an editor solicited a whole bunch of people to say to what extent were the predictions came true. And actually, my friend Ross Picard, the same one who did affective computing, contributed one of the chapters to say which of the predictions that Arthur C. Clarke made when he wrote the book really did come true in 2001. And it's actually a book. It's a book about how accurate was he in foreseeing what 2001 was going to be like in terms of technology that came to fruition.
There was a science fiction movie where they had LCD displays all over town showing video of people doing stuff. And it was science fiction when that movie came out. I think it was Running Man or something. I forget the name of the movie. But now we've got those.
Yeah. And by the way, one of the things that was in 2001 was picture phone, a video telephone. And here we are. How long have we had, audio video on the internet? That's been around since 2001. So that came true.
Who was the actor in those movies with the skyscrapers and the fire, cops and robbers movie?
Blade Runner.
Bad Day in the tower.
Oh, Charlton, was it Charlton Heston?
No, it was a good-looking guy.
Tom Cruise.
Not that good-looking. No, it was not Die Another Day. Die Hard.
Bruce Willis?
Brucey.
Yeah, Bruce Willis. So what was I going to say about Bruce
Hi, Maxwell.
Willis?
Say hi to Maxwell.
It wasn't me who said hi, it was this other guy over here with the glasses.
He's tying his shoes.
So Bruce
Yeah.
Willis was, he
Yeah.
was a good actor.
And Kayla has an earbud just like Lieutenant Uhura in Star Trek. Remember the communications manager? She had these earbuds exactly like Kayla's got today. And they're for real now.
Yeah.
Well,
What's the name of the machine that gives you a bowl of soup in Star Trek?
The
replicator.
Yeah, I think it was food
Re-
replicator. Yeah, I think you're
Replicator.
right.
That's it.
Yeah, yeah.
I think they did the
Replicate.
same thing in Minority Report, if you guys remember that. That was
Yes.
Tom Cruise.
Yes.
They
Yeah.
researched, the advanced technology to be able to implement it. It always makes me curious, like what the general doesn't know is happening or could come into fruition in the future. If that's on purpose because they're afraid that people are going to go crazy, make all these crazy theories, especially now, or it just isn't perfected and they don't want to roll it out. Anyways.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, nanobots.
People can
Chips,
start
chips,
replicating.
nanobot chips and things like that.
There's a
Nanobots,
danger, though.
cell phones are the big one. Edward
Klingon-
Snowden told us about
Klingon
that.
phaser. If you could replicate a Klingon phaser, you'd have problems.
Oh,
Oh,
they
yeah.
have they have laser guns and every kind of wave gun you can think of.
Yeah, the cops have those, what, I don't know, not called phasers. I don't know. I forget what they're called now. But
Oh, those yeah,
those stun guns that they use.
Phaser.
the monkey version of a phaser.
I'll look it up on Amazon. I'll search in Amazon for replicator, see what we get.
Yeah, you might just find one. It's called 3D printing. I think it's called 3D printing with organics right now.
Toy replicator.
In Minority Report, was it Tom Cruise who's the actor? He goes into the mall and those big display monitors that have advertising on them, animated advertising, and they were personalized. When he got near one, they
Yeah.
featured an advertising to him.
Yeah.
Well, go to Amazon and look up a product and instantly Facebook will give you an ad for the same product.
Yeah.
Instantly.
Or even talk on your phone to your friend and Google will listen and all of a sudden you'll have all kinds of baby ads. Where are all these baby ads coming from? Oh, I was talking to him. That's the only place I mentioned baby. So they're listening all the time, I believe. Yeah, there's some option I've said yes to somewheres along the line that allows them to sample for quality and advertising of some sort. So yeah, and emails the same way. That's how Google started, right? Reading your emails. So yeah, but with the Minority Report, there was a jump because there's a big pot of woo in there about crossing the now and the future line, which was kind of interesting. They had, I think psychics in a pool of water that could somehow bend time, and there's some really funky stuff going on, but it's still just as scary because, well, that's the thing about collection of data, and we've talked about that. And I think part of the vision of doing things differently is having control of your own data. We now have control of our banking data for the most part, which we never had when I was a kid, but medical records are coming.
What's
I don't
Google
know
doing?
self-sovereignty of being able to, go between countries a lot easier than having to, what kind of scanners are they going to have to let you go across a border? What's a border going to be like in 30 years? Is it going to be the same?
Where are you going with this? Is Google ethical? I was searching with Google and they were giving me results based on who was searching.
They dropped their motto. Don't be evil was the original motto. A few
Yeah,
years ago, they
see,
dropped it.
When I went
Because they're
downtown,
food.
when I went downtown and did the same search anonymously, I got a different set of results. When I searched from home, where Google knew it was me, they gave me a set of results that suited me. And that was bad news for me because I was trying to find out if the search engines were finding the stuff I was putting online.
I have the same issue with two different machines in my house. If I go to eBay looking for a product and I see it listed, but I don't act on it, then I'm on a different machine the next day and I go back to eBay, it finds a
Yeah.
different set.
Well, you don't you understand the cookies are saved in your browser log files?
Yeah.
So it knows what you've been doing on
Right.
particular machines.
But I logged into eBay with the same account. So eBay knows what I've been looking at. And yet
You
it
gotta
gives me
clear the
different
browser.
answers.
You didn't clear the browser history.
I don't,
No, but it's giving him different answers, not the same answers.
Well,
I decided that I was going to buy a particular product.
Yeah, see, hang on. The answers you're getting are based on your browser history and the cookies that the
It
browser's
could
been
be.
saving.
It could be. I just found that I couldn't find the same object that I had identified in another session on a different machine in the same house. And I had to do extra work to find it.
Now you know why.
They've been tracking people for as long as they've been selling stuff, but I did find that it says right here, following Google's corporate restructuring in a talk with Esteban under the conglomerate Alphabet Inc. in October 2015, Alphabet took the right thing, do the right thing as its motto. So they changed it from a negative to a positive. That's what Esteban was always talking about, right? Trying to rewrite things, and so do the right thing.
Esteban is the male version of Melania Trump. She says be best. He says something almost exactly the same.
Yeah. Well, this is Sam's motto, I think, too, for the COIs.
I don't think Esteban wasn't concerned about the right thing. He was concerned about the better thing.
Yeah, be better or something. Be better,
Yeah.
be best. It was all really the
Well, you
same.
know, if you're a serial killer, be a better serial killer.
No,
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
he wasn't. Ethics weren't involved in the discussion.
Sam's correction came in there, Barry.
The laws are just a step. There are many silent orgs that operate outside the law. Be and do good.
Be and do good. Yeah.
Is that what Esteban used to say? Be and do good?
No, that's the thing on the beginning of the journey map above the totem pole that I got from Sam, where you have to consider before you start your journey.
Well, that's a different context.
You better be good. Sounds okay, but you better be better.
That's
what I have an issue with.
Isn't that a Christmas song about children?
Well,
if
becoming is that easy. It's profound at the same time as water, right?
If you're an evil, greedy corporate politician robbing people and giving tax breaks to your millionaire buddies, and you do that better, then you're doing it better. You're becoming a better corporate thief. So, when Esteban was harping on about better be better, I brought that up and I said, hang on a minute. You've been repeating this over and over again, but you're not talking about ethics here. You're talking about bullshit. Over.
Speaking of bullshit, did anybody watch Dave Snowden's podcast interview on bullshit?
No.
I started to watch it. It's an hour and a half. So there's, I'm going to find an hour and a half to watch the whole thing. But
You're going to have a hot links page, Barry, because I can't keep up with them.
I can't keep up with them either. The stuff comes flying in the window faster than I can process.
That's why I like Medium.
Just keep posting it to burn raising topic and then link, topic, link.
On enlivening ed,
you post it in the chats, we lose it, right? So
they might include the award system that lets you know whether somebody's article is worth reading, like on Medium.
Yeah. I generally read Ethan Siegel's stuff. He's a reliable source of interesting, useful information, but it's kind of technical because it's mostly about cosmology.
I love that idea of white holes. There's a Zoom movie about black holes, and there's a Zoom movie about white holes.
Yep.
Well, I propose an experiment if the conversation's drying up. I've got some text in front of me, and you can stop me at any time, but these are Doug's words. And I want to see if they ring true for us, because this is very interesting stuff. If you'd like to play this experiment. This is him explaining coming to this space empty. I posted it to Barn Raising yesterday. You can follow along. So could you imagine experiential sort of whole body, whole being, experiential receiving without the back end hooks? So what does that mean? The sort of conceptual frame around the idea of being empty is, if those hooks didn't exist, if it wasn't being connected or referencing anything, if it was just literally being received with 100% tuning in on the receiving end. So that sounds like a receiver to me in a system.
Yeah,
And you
to me, it
can't
sounds like a
have
tape
it.
recorder. Turn on the
Yeah.
tape recorder and let it sit and record.
So I think if we were going to build a journey map, that's step one. And he talks later about when a project forms, that's along the trip. That's like a milestone along the road. You don't start there with the project. So I think, so he goes on to say, so it's 100% attention and conscious awareness, sensing, feeling in terms of energy dimensions of how somebody's expressing themselves, what nonverbal cues they are projecting, and all that environmental info, all of that. And I put environmental info, filling that in. So the idea of coming empty, the corollary, how do you say that? The corollary of it.
Corollary?
Yeah, the corollary of it in my frame.
Corollary.
The corollary, yeah, that's how it's spelled. The corollary of it in my frame is in service to, and then I put in brackets, the need. And I'm wondering if it's also within this frame collaboration. So, because it's until you actually add those provisos or a set of provisos that you could switch in or out, you're not really landing it anywhere. So I'll end there, but there's a whole bunch more. And you've heard it all before, but that's kind of where he says what it is a couple of times. And down below, he says it a couple more times what it is. But it's pretty interesting. Like the way you parse things out, Barry, I think this is something that we could actually model. If we can, someone's eating peanuts.
Oh, is Alex opening a bag of peanuts? he turned off his mic.
Yeah, if it's something that we can model or try to wrap a parser around, so that, because there's lots of things that are pro, and then there's things that are anti. Like he's got a list of antis here. He's got nice lists. The reason for the empty construct analogy is that if it's arriving with stuff, no, that if I'm arriving with stuff, that if I'm carrying in, no, if I'm carrying it in at the beginning, that's not translated properly. That if I'm carrying it in at the beginning, whatever the it is not being empty. So it's very, very non-defined, but I think it's consciousness. If your consciousness is clouded with, if you're not present, 100% present, I think is the best way to say it. So the reason for the empty construct is that if I'm arriving with stuff, that if I'm carrying it in at the beginning, my beliefs, my cognitive bias, my fears, my takes, my whatever, there's a fundamental allocation of resources to that. And then I put cognitive load. And he does go, so I think another big point here is he's talking about cognitive load.
Yeah.
So, right?
That's an important topic, cognitive load. How much, it's like, or you're overdriving your CPU and it's getting hot. If you're overdriving your brain's ability to process information, you have a heavy cognitive load and you generally stop doing reliable processing.
Yeah.
The bits come in and they just vanish.
So it's like, I think it's like arriving for work, rested, fed, and ready to go, basically, right? Without all your problems coming with you. There's so much, okay, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. So he goes on, yeah, there's a lot of stuff here. It goes on quite a while. And at the end, it's kind of interesting. After waiting for such a long time, Sam says, "So, are you talking about me specifically, or are you talking about in general?" And Doug clarified that he feels very aligned with Sam, and he's not talking about him personally in these words, but more generally speaking to the, like I do with the you to the. So there's been various words that I've had problem with Doug on, like we's a word, and this group, this we thing, like what are we doing? Who are we? Is managing the resources a we thing? Worrying about who's hosting what, and if a host disappears, what do we do? Is that a we thing? Like who are we? Anyway, I'll leave that. It's very interesting, but I think in forming a space where we can have a playground of consciousness and try to explain what that means is quite valuable. It's not something you find very often, that people are trying to frame things. And that's very much like a mind of a software developer or an engineer or whatever. And I do think it's good to dream big and then, find out, what's possible and what can you deliver and how fast can you get return on investment and all that stuff. But yeah,
I think of a good example of where this was done in the past is the movie Yellow Submarine with the Beatles. I think they actually did that when they made the movie Yellow Submarine. I think they did that. They went in and they just created something out of whole cloth, all with total imagination. I won't say that they left everything behind, because it's a kind of a send up of the culture that they were living in.
Yeah.
But it was very creative and original and quite novel for the time.
Well, he speaks to the actual result that he's looking for. He actually has a desired result. Well, he makes a claim like it's completely different experiential frame. In that frame, all of the attachments, judgments, shadows, fears, belief, knowledge, all of that stuff accumulated and generated from stuff in the rear view mirror. Stuff in the past is literally left at the door. So he says to that, what is created? Everything sort of originates and starts with the construct of space, literal, empty, an empty container, intrinsically co-manifested as a starting point, collectively by each individual having subscribed to a set of values in one hand and a purpose in service, and I put to and needs. So
Empty
yeah,
container.
so what am I in service to with you, right? Those things, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, there's somewhere where he says where it forms in that space. A lot of parsing going on here. Like he's the master of listing things in a sentence, right? So instead of using commas, I'm making it point form.
In service to our Sunday services.
Yeah.
Sunday services.
The only thing that makes me feel comfortable is that I know there's not any power over, so it's not going to turn into a cult.
I'm not so sure about that. I think everybody is inherently a cult leader, a potential cult leader of their cult. Cult is their culture. So everybody brings their culture and they introduce their culture. That's a cult leader.
So we're global cult culture now?
Well, one of the things that was interesting at Bell Labs was they spend a lot of time figuring out what is the culture of the company and what does it mean to change the culture. And the question is, what does the word culture mean? And we finally decided the definition of culture is, quote, the way we do things. That was the definition of culture, the way we do things.
Mm.
And of course, every culture has a way of doing things. And then you say, but then what is the way we do things? What are the elements of the way we do things? We just call it culture, but it varies from one unit to the next, one organization to the next.
So here's another part. He says, I should have skipped over this because it's what I was looking for. Didn't edit it it's quite long. This is line 203. But those aren't substantive those aren't as substantive. The values speak. Okay, it's not written right, but those aren't substantive as the values speak. When someone's talking on video, it's not the same as the transcript doesn't always read as smoothly as what their presentation was with their verbal and their hands in the air and whatnot. So sorry about that. So he's talking about to the way we're going to orient in relation to each other in co-creating. So that's why I put the Venn diagram around the co-creating, because he keeps coming back to this theme of co-creating or collaboration. The difference between co-creating and collaboration, I don't know. It's more of a way, kind of dimension to it, in a meta dimension to it. And the purpose is a synthesized, a co-created statement of what we are all working in service to. So it's really like we're all in the boat rowing together. And, you know, I feel aligned if that's about trying to define what's better and do sense making and blah, 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 what I fill in that container with. But the next person's going to feel they're good and better in that container, and it might conflict with mine, or the priority is the values, as Barry was showing with the levels with his hands earlier, always come into, you know, and then you have budgets, right, and governments. So I'm saying these constraints are the culture that we're water we're swimming in. So it's not like we can just start living on land all of a sudden, or can we? Right. So that's anyway, I'll shut up there. But you know,
there's a very interesting visual metaphor for that, Colin. Here in Boston, we have the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, and it's a museum of fine arts, paintings and other fine arts. And there's a room that has a painting by Whistler, the same Whistler who does Whistler's Mother. And this painting, which is actually right next to that one, it's a very dark painting. And it turns out, if you look at it closely, you see in the distance a tiny little lighthouse, just barely visible in the darkness. And in the foreground, there's a very faintly visible rowboat. And you can imagine that the guy in the rowboat is trying to row towards the lighthouse, which you can barely see. So you can imagine he's rowing towards the lighthouse, but you cannot see that there is a current in the water. The current is unseen and so as he rows through the lighthouse, he drifts. So he has to keep turning back towards the lighthouse. And so now he's going that direction, but he's again drifting. So he ends up kind of going around in a spiral. So he eventually gets to the lighthouse. This is all in your imagination because it's a fixed painting. He eventually gets to the lighthouse, but he doesn't take a direct path. If he had aimed to the side of the lighthouse, he would have compensated for the current, and he would have actually taken a direct path. But because he aims at the lighthouse, unbeknownst to him, the current causes him to take a very, very long spiral. If the current is strong enough, he never gets there. No matter how much he aims at the lighthouse, if the current is stronger than his rowing speed, he never gets there. And I think this is what happens in some of these sessions, is that we keep aiming. This is what Sam calls focus. We keep aiming at the goal, but we keep drifting away from it. And if the drift is too intense, we not only do a spiral, we do a spiral that gets wider and wider instead of spiraling in. Thank you, Mr. Whistler, the son of Whistler's mother, for that visual image.
Yeah, it's interesting. It seems like when he wanted to take a break, he probably wrote the Serenity Prayer.
Whistler did that?
No, I'm just riffing on the fact that that would be a good time to write that poem. Paddle faster if you can.
But it's amazing how much information is in that still picture with practically no, it's almost all black. Two tiny little lighthouse and the rowboat. You can barely see them in the painting. Alex.
As he's approaching that lighthouse, he could see the door entrance at the bottom, but it would be moving to the left or right, depending on which way the current was taking him. So as he got closer and closer to the lighthouse, it would appear as if the lighthouse was rotating, but he wasn't making any progress.
Exactly. Yeah. And if the current is exactly the same speed as his rolling, he basically goes in an orbit. Doesn't spiral in, doesn't spiral out. And those dynamics are not at all obvious. It takes a lot of imagination to imagine either spiraling in, spiraling out, or aiming off to the side so that his true path is a beeline to the lighthouse. That's not trivial. That's literally that's rocket science.
Well, that's also the importance of coming empty, because if you're coming
Yeah.
empty, then you can wait to see what emerges, and then you can adapt and go slowly and little at a time,
Right.
which
Yeah.
is something we don't do.
Right. If you go too slowly against the current, you go backwards.
Yeah, you know what increases the current is all the layers of abstraction that we have in our consciousness, all our biases and favorites and opinions.
Yep, that's right.
If they're all removed, we get a
Right.
clearer view of the
Right. The
lighthouse.
baggage is the bias, and the bias is the current, and
Right.
it's making us drift away from the intended focus.
Right. Observation noted.
Yeah, and then the bias is reflected in the slider or the gauge, and a still water would be a gauge that would be at its neutral position, or it would be, that color indicator I was saying, it would be transparent. There'd be no bias coloring the conversation. Because
we
there's
are not
there's always-
rowing in still waters. We are rowing in currents. The
I
currents
think
of the
that-
culture.
I think that's the big point here. And that's why the Serenity Prayer, give me the power to handle the currents I can handle, and know when I have to get ready for the waterfall.
You see
Well, I
what
think-
Sam wrote? Sam writes, how you decide how to adapt in real time. That stuff is not left at the door. Knowing how to adapt to a culture, to the currents, is prior knowledge. You leave that at the door and you just drift. You're just drifting like driftwood, flotsam, and you're flotsam
Yeah.
and jetsam in the
The
current.
stuff
I'll play Doug's
some of the-
devil's advocate and say, if it's good and it's positive and it's generative, it's welcome. How's that? It's invited.
Well, I don't know. The
Why wouldn't it be? Why wouldn't it be? Like, I don't think Doug wants to block anybody. He named it unblocking, right?
because
you know where
all
the currents drift to? They drift to the Sargasso Sea. If you drift with the driftwood in the Atlantic, you end up in the Sargasso Sea, which is the doldrums. There's no current and no wind. It's a dead spot.
Well, I think
you
this
end up in a dead
experiment,
spot.
as Stacy mentioned, this experiment's kind of flowing in that direction. It might be working. So the next piece is where he tries to land this, which is where I thought it was interesting, because he says some words that he kind of uses words that he doesn't want to use, or he's redefined them, like leader, for example.
Yeah.
So in a different experiential orientation to co-creating, that is full spectrum, in the sense that there's all the who, what, where, when, why, it, all the stuff that does emerge. So within this empty space, he's saying something does emerge, but we come empty, something emerges. So that step we notice. So that's sort of like there's a lot of acronyms for the process of going through some kind of a system management and software or design, fabrication. They all, there's all these. So I hate to bring in a model, but I think we need to use a model to say that, we have to kind of say chicken egg stuff. So
yeah,
the egg
here's a
stuff.
model. We've got a model with the lighthouse. If all those abstractions you're bringing into the room are increasing the current, you're not getting closer to see the light.
That's true. Yep, that's right. That's right.
And the
And
opposite of the lighthouse is the Sargasso Sea. The flotsam and the jetsam drift to a point where there's no further current and no further wind, and that's called the Sargasso Sea. It's real.
Yeah,
Go to
that's
the
interesting.
Sargasso Sea in the South Atlantic and you'll see stuff just arrive there in a pile of junk.
So
So-
that's because
so when
the guy who brought the lighthouse into the room isn't in the Sargasso Sea.
No, he's the opposite. He's where you want to get out of the Sargasso Sea into a place that's makes more sense. But so
So-
what's happening is that a lot of cultures drift into their own Sargasso Sea.
Yeah. Well, the deal with the analogy as far as the water and the current, in reality, the current is because of nature, right?
Yes.
But the analogy for us is that the current is created, how do you say? It's the sum.
It's created because the Earth rotates. It's a
No.
sphere and it rotates on its own axis. and that creates the currents.
No, I'm talking about the current of people putting their bias in the conversation, so other people have to row faster. So we create that. I don't want to say collectively is the word I'm talking about, not collaboratively.
That's
Collectively,
created,
there's the
created by
culture,
a lack.
right?
Yeah.
It's created by a lack of leadership.
Yeah.
Sure.
The anachronistic culture, the culture that humans created 4, 5, 6,000 years ago, the anachronistic culture, the obsolescent culture persists.
And that's why they
culture.
say,
That's the baggage of human society.
that's why they say cross current, right? Or
Yeah.
cross green, because you go or an outcast.
Ever
So-
try to land an airplane with a crosswind? You have to
Yeah.
you have to aim the airplane, so you're actually landing the airplane sideways. It's really
So you're
tricky to land an
composing,
airplane in a crosswind.
A good musician can compose music with layers of abstraction, would be able to land a plane really efficiently, I think.
Yeah, it's
Well,
quite a trick to navigate a crosswind. It's
I'd
very
like to stay with that
advanced.
analogy. I'd like to stay with that analogy. Alex kind of came with an addition to the current, and I agree with him that is the current that we make from culture and our bias to conversations. You could have macro current and micro current, like we have a GCC current, right?
Eddies. We have eddy currents.
Eddies, yeah, all kinds
The
of
hobby
things.
horses create the eddy currents.
Yeah, and so this
Spirals-
is really nice. These
Spirals of
analogies,
abstraction.
yeah, these analogies are really good and useful because I think they are making us have a bit of visualization of what we're involved in, and I think that's part of what I think Doug's getting at when you come in, so he goes on and he does land this plane, and that's one of my criticisms. Now I don't know if he lands it in a satisfactory way. Sam has an ejection so far to you could read that again, Barry.
Yeah, so he wrote, if I can find it now, I'll have to scroll back. Yeah, so adapting to the cross currents, that adaptation is skill and knowledge that you do not leave behind, not
Yeah.
left at the door. You have to bring with you a skill to navigate in the face of cross currents and bias currents.
And I would like to add that on the conversation map as a new branch that could be answered by Doug. And on we go, right?
Yeah, and by the way, if you ever listen to Doug versus Sam will use mathematical reasoning as I do. Doug does not do quantitative reasoning. He does not do mathematical reasoning. He is a narrative. Doug works in the domain of narrative stories. Sam and I work partly in the domain of narratives and stories, but mainly in the domain of mathematical or quantitative reasoning. And that's a huge difference between our cultures. It doesn't say one is right and one is wrong. There's just a huge difference in our cultures. Quantitative reasoning versus qualitative reasoning.
Can you speak to that in terms of what I would consider a filter or a conversation block?
Basically, the filter is Doug will filter out quantitative analysis, numbers and mathematics, where Joel was into geometry. Okay. And he would basically concentrate his thinking in geometric terms. Doug is a storyteller. He wrote a book, right? And that's a narrative. And so you have the narrative mode, you have the quantitative or mathematical mode, and they're very different. They're very useful. They reach different audiences, but you can do things in one mode that you can't do very well in the other. And it's a challenge to balance qualitative versus quantitative, storytelling versus theory.
So would it be useful for Doug's profile square when he's talking to shine bright with the color of that quality so that people could understand? And Doug may or may not agree with that, but if 10 people in the room out of 11 think that he's a narrator and not of quantity, but of story, right?
Yep, he says that. I mean, somewhere, if you can do a search and figure out what search words, you can find where he declares he doesn't do numerical, mathematical, quantitative, whatever word he used. He doesn't do mathematical quantitative analysis. He does narrative qualitative stuff.
Well, I definitely want it to be a positive experience. So if we did bring that information forward, it'd have to be vetted and, any types of corrections, put onto it, do a little bit of steel manning, as it were. And then that can go into the quality perception map
Yeah.
of the conversation tool. I think that's important. Things like that. Now, I don't know if we need them for our group per se, but maybe some conversations do need that when you're up against different. And this is where I think we got into an argument before, Barry, where you might have been thinking I was trying to pin on other people what I thought the sliders should be set at, and it's more complicated than that.
Very complicated. First of all, the sliders are not in. See, it's nice if the sliders are independent. In that character model from Adobe, you can say skin color or hair color or eye color, and that's just a single slider. But sometimes the parameters are correlated or anti-correlated. So if you adjust one slider, it cannot be slid independently of the others. They have to be in some kind of a combination. And
Yeah, that's to be
as soon
expected.
as you have correlated elements, you can't just have separate sliders.
Yeah.
If you increase the treble, you inherently decrease the bass because they're out.
My sliders on my guitar have got a switch as well, which changes the way the tone and knobs operate.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, switches are digital, knobs are analog, and sliders are analog. And what I'm saying is, you're right, Barry. And I think that those sliders that you actually have afforded to you are not static. You could have a different set of sliders, right? So based on that fact, you may say, you know what, we should split that slider into two sliders. So next time you have that interaction, you've got more nuance.
Yeah.
And if you change the master slider, it changes them both, but you do have the option to put some nuance in there, which you can think about as frequency field, right?
Yeah, but hang on.
I'll give you an example. I'll give you a live example. Colin, I have the participants window open here on Zoom. And when you're talking, there's a little microphone icon and actually oscillates. And as you talk, it goes up and down at a certain frequency. Now, I don't think it's actually mapped to the frequency at which you're talking, but you can actually see literally a slider on a little microphone icon go up and down, meaning it's in motion. It's active.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's not.
I like the ghosty donuts.
You know, the nearer your destination, slip sliding away.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. Yeah. I don't know if we want to continue on with Doug, but there's many more things to say. But he's landing it with the project. So he says something does emerge when you get down to a project at the earth level. And I put concrete specifics of a project in question mark to kind of ask, is that what you mean? So when you get down to a project at the earth level of manifesting something, bringing something into being, but there are layers and dimensions of co-creation before that project definition that are operating on a visioning level, on a crystallizing level, on an energizing level. It is these elemental planes of progressively increasing densities of matter. So I put a knowledge trail fundamental, a boundary or mid-journey emergence. Okay.
Sam has something in chat that I want to read aloud in case you're not attending the chat. Sam says theory does not obviate storytelling, nor VV. I'm not sure what VV stands for. Then he says characterizing mathematical as quantitative is incomplete. Yeah, I agree with that. Mathematics, in my humble opinion, is the language of relationships, not just quantities. VV is vice versa. So I'll go back and repeat that. Theory does not obviate storytelling nor vice versa. Yeah, I agree. You need both because you're speaking to different audiences.
I think that makes your point stronger, actually.
Yeah. So characterizing mathematical as quantitative is incomplete. Mathematics, in my humble opinion, is the language of relationships, not just quantities, vice versa. Yeah. So that's right. And I think what we need to do is receive both storytelling and mathematical representations or models as complementary ways to express the same deep concepts. And some people will listen to the stories and some people will react to the mathematical theoretical models and figure out a way to switch back and forth between the two. If you're only doing one, you're only getting about half of the insight. You're not getting the grokking.
I can imagine a situation where there's some people standing around trying to, come up with an idea, and they're all scratching their chins. Like, what ends up happening is the yellow submarine, but they don't know it yet, right?
Right.
And they're scratching their chins.
Yeah.
And someone like me comes around and says, what's this GCC unblocking about? And they, they're not even sure, but they're going to end up with yellow submarine. And there's this guy asking all these questions, like, so, well, how are you going to do that? And how are you going to do this? And it's like, so if you're not in the right mind space and you're trying to analyze and Venn diagram and model everything, you're kind of not approaching. And I think that's what maybe Stacy and Glenn and some of those people see, because I am a mathematical system type minded thinker. And I do like to stand on a platform of knowledge. And I don't think I can come empty, but I can definitely come into an experiment not knowing what to expect and try to be ready for anything, right? I can obey commands like, please leave all your engineering at the door until we need it, which we probably won't, so please try not to use it.
Sliders. Leave your sliders at the door.
Yeah, leave your sliders at the door, exactly.
Aren't
Because,
sliders the kind of food that you eat at the banquet table?
I didn't actually know that. In fact, I call them more potentiometers.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Also,
feedback ones too, automated potentiometers.
yeah. Sam says this is the fundamental idea behind what he calls mentor, not mentor, but mentor, T-O-U-R. That's his cutesy little term of art for balancing between storytelling and deep models, mathematical quantitative relationship models. And of which the analogy, like that analogy I gave with the painting, with the rowboat, that's a visual analogy, which is also, implies the mathematics, the dynamics of motion.
Did you say that calculus needed the prerequisite of algebra?
It's the other way around. Algebra is a prerequisite. You cannot do calculus until you've mastered algebra. It's like you can't master reading until you learn the alphabet.
So the algebra is the prerequisite.
Algebra is a prerequisite for calculus. If you don't learn algebra, forget it. You're never going to learn calculus.
Yep.
That doesn't mean you can't throw and catch a ball. Throwing and catching a ball, even a dog can catch a frisbee. And of course, a dog doesn't know calculus, but your brain is doing the same. In fact, standing up without falling over is doing calculus, except that most people can't explain what the brain's doing when it does it. They can't write down the
your brain's measuring the level of fluid in those air chambers that tell you whether you're standing upright or not.
Or if you're falling, in which direction you're falling.
Yeah.
And the motion, the fact that it's determining motion, that's the time varying quantity that it's attending to, because that's how you avoid falling over. You can't just say, oh, I'm falling over. You have to say in what direction and how fast.
That's the variable you need to monitor.
Right. If you don't have the numbers, the fact that you're falling over, it isn't enough to stop you from falling over.
So it's just a little calculator.
Yeah, your brain is doing calculus.
Organic calculation.
Yeah, balance a broom. Take a broom and try to balance it on your palm of your hand. Do it first normally, then do it with your eyes closed or looking at your palm. Then do it looking at the top.
Yeah.
If you look at the top, you can do it. If you look at your palm, you can't. Why? Because the information is the direction that is falling and the rate. And that information is only visible at the top. If you look at your palm, you don't see that information. So you can't balance it.
But the organic calculator in our brain is primitive compared to an electronic calculator.
Well, it's slow.
Yeah.
It's slow, but it's remarkably powerful. Considering, what computers could do 50, 60, 70 years ago, it was.
Considering the moving parts, there's hardly any moving parts.
Yeah.
And if you can dictate into your calculator, you don't even need a keyboard.
Right, exactly. Hey, Cortana. So, yeah, but yeah, my feeling, especially if you're in engineering and science, you need both. You especially need the quantitative mathematical stuff. But if you're going to do storytelling, people have been doing storytelling without math for centuries, millennia. They used analogies and metaphors and waved their hands and things like that.
Well, thanks for bringing that back around, Barry, because it's so true that science is story. In fact, if you don't have story, it's really hard to understand the language of the symbology. You start with 1 + 1, and if you don't get that, then you're not going to get the next lesson.
Yeah.
So
Science journalists have a devil of a time, because science journalists who are writing for the general public know that they can't just give you the mathematical models. They know they have to give you a story. And it is really hard to take science, which is full of mathematical models, and render them in stories that doesn't do disservice to the science. It's
And I
really
think-
challenging.
I think the radio shows do a pretty good job of that, what is it, NPR and CBC. I don't know about BBC.
Science Friday, yeah.
No,
Yeah,
my
they-
challenge is to come into the room for unblocking 100% vacant, because the piece of paper I've got in my hand says 0 multiplied by 0 equals 0. It means I've
I'm
got
still
nothing to
thinking-
work with.
I'm still thinking it's a frame of mind. Like you just can't burn all dictionaries and then show up, right? You gotta. So I was saying to you guys yesterday that just the first thing came to my head when I was going through this. I said, well, you can't use this for brain surgery. And then I said, wait now. I said, if I was a brain surgeon, I would definitely want to be 100% present when at that patient in front of me. And I would want to have collaborating people beside me who understand when I say clamp what I mean. Like we got the terminology figured out.
Yeah.
But
What are we
I don't
doing
know what's
today?
going hold on. I don't know what's going to happen. So I better be ready for anything. And I think that's almost 100% example of what Doug's talking about.
But can you collaborate with the patient? Can you have the patient give you real-time feedback from his brain while you're operating on it?
Yeah,
I think they've done that. They've done that, Barry. You know that.
move your finger,
Yeah.
move your toe,
Well,
move your foot. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay,
but do
we've
you
got-
trust
we're-
do you trust what they're saying?
Well, and then the surgeon says, okay, he's not moving his foot. That means we've got this piece of lobe here, prefrontal cortex, that operates the foot.
motor
You
cortex.
don't know.
It's a motor
The mind
cortex.
is a funny place. That's one of the things that I learned that the mind is a strange place, and that's where we are. So
If he starts laughing, then you know you've got the place which stimulates humor.
Yeah. Some people are out of their mind.
What is
well, that's the
mind?
point. That's the point. Like some of these conversations about present scene and game A, game B, it's like, and the reality underlying the reality and blah, 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 depending on which guru you're listening to. Hold on. They get to the idea that that we don't really have, free will or a grasp on what's happening anyway. And I find that just devolves into a meaningless point of view. I like Dan Dennett's view on that, but
Elbow
but that-
rule, varieties of free will worth wanting.
yes.
I
Exactly.
like
So-
the theory of mind over matter. If you don't mind, it doesn't matter.
well, if you can't understand the story, you're not going to understand the model underneath of it. And all models come with a story because they were hard won, and they tell you the story.
If those stories were written 3,000 years ago, chances are a person in the 21st century is not going to understand the story, because the metaphors and the terms that were the vocabulary of 3,000 years ago probably doesn't mean to the modern person what it meant to the person who wrote the story millennia ago. This is why it's so hard to make sense of Greek literature or scriptures or whatever that's written thousands of years ago. It has meaning, it's just very hard to decode it.
An easy way you can see Coming Empty, I think, is if you look from the perspective of the book Sapiens, where it really stresses the point that the things that we do and abide by for our convenience, effectiveness, whatever it works, are all imagined orders. We could have imagined it a different way.
Well,
So there's your
theory starts with imagination, but the evidence that the stories had meaning is that if you look,
But everything, it's everything, government, what's good and bad, and they give examples from different cultures, like of how, there's caste systems and, at different times, and, people would justify that at that time. And they would say, not only that, that's natural. That's the way it's always been. So it's part of their justification, right?
the evidence that the stories of yore made sense is the fact that in modern psychology, they borrowed the names that they use today. The Oedipus complex, narcissism comes from the story of Narcissus, the Electra complex. They actually realized that these classical Greek stories with these characters were exemplars of these psychological states. And they actually borrowed the names from these ancient Greek stories and use them today. Words like ego and narcissism and Oedipus complex, those are all taken right out of Greek stories. There's your evidence that those stories made sense. Alex?
What's an Oedipus complex?
Oedipus, well, I don't know if you know the story of Oedipus. It's a story of a young man who was prophesied to kill his father and marry his mother. And because of the prophecy, he ran away from home. Because he ran away from home, he didn't come to know his father or his mother. They were strangers to him. And later in the story, he meets two strangers, one of whom he kills, turns out to have been his father. This is the Darth Vader and Anakin Skywalker. This is the same story. And in that one, he doesn't marry his mother, but it turns out that the female in the story is his sister. So it's a variant of it. So it's having a strange relationship with your parents because you don't know them. And turns out that the Oedipus complex is a phenomenon that's discussed in modern psychology. You know, people have mommy problems and daddy problems. That's really the origin. You know, that's the extreme becoming alienated from your parents and then treating them like your enemy.
I know my mummy had problems and my daddy had problems.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
well, that's true. That's so true. And that's a hard one. It's like, it's not only mummies and daddies, but it's society and going to school and, you know, being different. Like that's what, and the question is the shame put upon these people, or I don't know if I'm leaning in this my own way, but that's what I felt growing up, because there's a way to do things right. And I'm a free thinker and I don't think that that's true. So, you know, so if that makes me an atheist, that's okay. But if that makes me a bad person, that's not okay.
by the way, our word echo in the Narcissus story, Narcissus falls in love with his own reflection in the pond. And Narcissus is very self-centered, but he has a companion whose name is Echo. And Echo nods and agrees and echoes back everything Narcissus says. Our word echo comes right out of the Greek, you know, the reflector who just reflects back. And so you have the visual reflection and you have the audible reflection. You only are aware of yourself. See how these ideas are very deep, very profound, and we still use the same words today.
So back to Doug's story. He says, he goes, what am I in service to?
Others.
Those two things. And I put values and servicing purpose. I put a serving purpose. So values, and I put serving purpose.
Which means meeting other people's needs, which means you have to be able to identify their needs. If you can identify somebody's needs, even if they don't articulate them, then you can serve their needs.
Well, I'm putting in the frame of collaboration. So it would be the environment, the environment's needs, and the type of people who could come around and align over here, and they could align over there. You know, you got the cooks, the painters, the army.
What does the earth need? What does the culture need? What does the environment need in order to sustain a livable system, a livable planet?
Yeah, a humanist philosophy in the broadest sense. So, but those aren't substantive as values to the way that we're going to orient.
Only if survival is a value. If survival's not, if nihilism is a value, you know, make everything go away. Nihilism is one of the philosophies, you know. So survivalism and nihilism are sort of opposite philosophies, and you can pick and choose.
Yeah. But he's saying that those two things, but those, he says, which I assume he means values and servicing purpose, aren't substantive as the values speak to the way we're going to orient in relation to each other in co-creating. So even though we have the values and servicing purpose, that isn't going to speak, because it's more of a way, a kind of dimension. So environment, I guess I'm saying, or space, where, you know, the lab where something could happen. And there's tools in the lab. Nobody's cleaning out the lab starting from nothing, right? But when you get to the lab and you're going to do an experiment, maybe, you know, can Doug insert his story at that point? Okay, at lab, go Doug, roll. Like, you know, can he fill in that story? Or there's certain places where he doesn't want to have his story. Does
Here's
that make
another
sense?
comment from Sam Wood. Would you want Neil deGrasse Tyson to leave everything at the door, or Carl Sagan? Alex says yes, but I don't think they would want to or could leave everything at
Well,
the door.
I did watch to pretty much the end, at least the end of this this
The one-on-one?
particular this thought trail. I watched to the end of this particular thought trail, and I'm kind of, I guess, not completed in trying to transcribe it. But I have to listen to it as I transcribe it, right? And it's long, and I got tired, so I didn't do a perfect job.
Turn it into
for
an
sure.
allegory. Turn it into a short allegory.
Well, at the end, Doug definitely, as soon as they got into the ping pong state of replying to what was said, you know, Sam says, well, I'm going to try to reply to what you said, but, you know, and Doug says, oh, sorry, because he knows he just got done talking for 15 minutes straight, right? And he's got these long lists, but we captured them. We can model them. We can, you know, we can fine tune what the Venn diagram is presenting us, because we're assuming it's got value, right? Or we wouldn't be asking. And so at the end, Doug assures Sam that he feels aligned with Sam. So if Doug knows that Sam doesn't expect to leave his math at the door, then there's a different way that Doug is expecting Sam to access that agency. So I think it's just order of course. So that's why I say like a little, you know, a model of starting here, we start from empty, then step one. And right now I'm probably violating the whole purpose of what he's trying to do by trying to put step one, step two, step three, right? But I think we need to have 4 or 5 of these stories, then put them aside and say, okay, now let's try it. And we don't know where step 1 or 2 is going. But there's got to be a meta story here. I know you know what I'm saying, Barry. I hope you do.
Well, there's an allegory. Meta stories are often expressed in terms of allegories because that's the sort of definition. Meta is abstract. And it's very challenging and very creative to write allegories or parables that are meta stories, that are abstractions of what's really happening. It's descriptions of the culture, and they make you aware of the culture you're in. And it's very powerful, very necessary, and very difficult to write a good allegory.
If done right, they become tools, right?
Yeah,
Cognition tools.
They become shapers of tomorrow's culture. They create the opportunity to improve the features of the culture. And without, I mean, comedians do it, political cartoonists do it, people who write allegories do it. That's the whole point of writing these things, is to point out the foibles of our culture so that people can laugh at them and then evolve beyond them, so they don't keep repeating these stupid practices of the past that are no longer working.
So let me give Doug another gift here, and I'm going to say how it makes me feel when I say something like tool in this context. You responded in a very positive way, even, you know, modified it in a way that made sense to you. But I feel sometimes when I use that word tool, I'm off the track, and Doug says, no, there's no tools, there's no, and whatever I say, I don't know how, you know what I'm trying to say. So I need to find a way to not say the wrong thing. And, you know, like an example today I used was use the word feedback instead of conflict, right? Or sorry, not conflict, criticism. Use feedback instead of the word criticism.
That's a good point. Feedback can be critical. The feedback can be constructive. And the most useful feedback is constructive feedback. Feedback that can and will be acted on. A lot of feedback can be acted on, but isn't, because it's offensive. It's emotionally offensive.
Now, doesn't that take us right back to almost like, you know, halfway between node 1 and 2, where we need the terminology sheet, like refer to it on our way? Like it's almost ironic that the tool that we use to get to where we're going is the tool we need to build to help us to get, which would be that terminology sheet, right?
Well, building a tool while you're using it, or modifying a tool while you're using it, is quite a challenge. But in a tool-driven system, you do have to modify your tools while you're using them. And that ain't easy to do because you can end up just making your tool dysfunctional when you're trying to improve it or repair it.
I agree. And I think that's where sometimes my software development mindset, engineering mindset, I may be taking things for granted in accepting that complexity already, knowing about what I know has to be ready for change or some interface that is being zero until someone calls on it and changes it to be something else.
Yeah.
Ready to generate into a new interoperative, node in a system. So, how do we, I think that's what you were saying earlier about the science writers have to come up with the right story. So I time and time again, I think we're coming back to presenting TED Talks of 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and 15 minutes. If we can do that, then we have something to say. And if you don't, it's not expected of everybody that comes here. That's the thing. It's just, if you're actually trying to say something, then maybe that could be a mark of an achievement when you're happy with what you're trying to say and other people say, yeah, that makes sense.
And the TED Talks become videos that are up on YouTube forever. And they're valuable for, well, I'll say forever, but for a damn long time, they're still very watchable and very current. And these conversations on Zoom on Saturday and Sunday are very ephemeral. They're gone with the wind, literally gone with the wind. This is the wind talking. It's the wind. They're gone with the wind.
It's the zero that we're emerging from. It's the pre-made abyss.
Yeah, well, zero is a loop that closes on itself. Here's your zero. It goes around in circles.
Anyway, I won't run with that anymore. Seems like we're out of time anyway. That was so much fun. I thought we still had time left.
Yeah, so it's been 2 hours. So do we end here, Sam? Oh, Sam has to type. He can't talk.
We must be like Bob Ross. We put them all to sleep.
Well, I can't tell if his eyes are glazed over because he doesn't have his camera on. I'm going to give Sam a chance to type a remark, and because Stacy's got her camera off, Kayla's got her camera off, Josh has got his camera off. Everybody's got their camera off except me. I think we're done.
Yeah.
Sam
Bye.
says anytime.
I'm done.
Okay, Sam says anytime. Anybody want to have a closing remark? Joshua or Kayla, do you want to have a closing comment before we say goodbye? Joshua just turned his camera on. He's oriented. He's upside down.
I just wanted to say how nice it is to hear everyone unblocked, and just how nice it is to, have regenerative type of conversation. So thank you guys for letting me listen. And I didn't get to participate as much as I'd like to, but thank you. It was nice to hear everyone.
Yeah, as they say in the culture I grew up in, Hine matovu manayim shevarachim gam yachad. How goodly it is when people dwell together in peace.
Indeed.
Anything you want to say, Stacy? You look very contemplative.
Nope. Nothing
Okay.
I want to say.
Okay, Sam, you want to stop the recording and end the session, or shall I do that?
I'd like to ask Stacey a question, but you can stop recording if you want. Doesn't matter.
You could leave it on. What's the question?
Yeah, no, it's not that it should be off. It's just that, no, we were talking before and you started to do some things with the retrospectives, and I don't know where you went with that. And I know my tool isn't retrospective ready to what I want it to do, but I've been playing around with a few ideas. So I wouldn't mind catching up with you on where that might be going to in retrospectives.
Okay.
Yeah.
I do have a question. I was going to ask you, but there wasn't really a time to do it. I noticed that you on a Facebook page, you had tagged me on a conversation from a year ago. And you asked me about white lies, if I had changed my mind. So I answered the best I could, even though I wasn't really sure what your question was. But what was that about?
Well, maybe you don't remember it as clearly as I do, but one of the conversations that we had was me trying to explain why I think that sometimes it can be ethical to tell white lies. And I was getting into the deontological and the different types of ethics and ways to look at it.
I remember
And-
that.
Yeah. So, and you were quite stern. And then recently I thought I heard you changed your mind on that. So a couple of things came together. So I said, oh, where was that? So I think I searched for the post that we were talking about that on, the white lies. And
Okay, 'cause I didn't go back and reread the whole post from a year ago. I just,
Hell no. We could, but no, that's not the point. But it's interesting if we can. I do like the idea of following through in context. So yeah. And I
So
do think I think you've changed your mind that there are some times that it's okay to tell a white lie. Am I right?
no.
Oh,
Well, yes and no. It's like what Barry was saying before is which value supersedes. So if I'm telling a white lie to save your life, yes, it's okay. But usually when people tell white lies, because they are small lies, all right. So I just recently told my first white lie in years. And I noticed how easy it was to do. And it wasn't to save somebody's life. I just didn't feel like dealing with it. And it goes deeper than that. I won't go, but it was a simple lie where I just told somebody that I was busy when I wasn't. And that was literally the first time that I told a white lie, because there's another part of me that really is hanging on to this value of being able to speak one's own truth in spite of what consequences you might be faced with. So for me, because of that value, I was very hesitant to tell those kind of lies. And I'm going to stop because what I noticed, it became really easy to do.
yeah. Well, I know you, and I'm not a priest or anything, but if I could, I would absolve you. You feel no guilt or shame.
Well, here's the thing. I don't need, my whole thing is the one person you shouldn't lie to is yourself. And I wasn't lying to myself. I knew exactly why I was telling the lie. I haven't explained it all here, but I knew why I was telling the lie. And that's what's important. And that's what I think, I think a lot of people that tell white lies, and this is what I was speaking to when you and I were talking, they make it like they're telling the white lie to be nice, but it's really not about the other person. It's about how they will feel about themselves. And that's a way of lying to yourself. And if somebody's giving me feedback that I'm doing something well, that's going to cause me to keep going in that same direction. So that is not helpful. That's actually harmful. Especially when a person is asked. And that's why another thing I believe strongly is don't give your opinion unless you're asked. But if you're asked, be honest enough to either say, I don't feel comfortable answering, or tell the truth. So I haven't changed on that.
And you forgave yourself for that white lie.
Absolutely. And the fact that I could admit it and say it and be open about it, I think is confirmation of that.
Exactly. You can admit it, you can forgive yourself, you can admit it, and you can disclose it.
Right.
And there's no shame.
No.
That's important.
No. Any other questions before I sign off and finish my dishes? Oh, Colin's gone.
Colin's gone. Yeah, I just realized he's gone. I don't know. I didn't notice when he left in the middle of your answer.
Well, I'm sure it was accidental. I will give him the benefit of that.
So everybody have what does Doug say? I give you back the rest of your Sunday or something like that.
Yes. Yes.
Everybody have a good time.
Okay. Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.